Okay, so here's with this paycheck problem that you're working on that you're having some problems with. So right here, I'm going to leave, you know how to import your packages for your scanner here. You're going to create your scanner, and then you're going to have to talk about your variables. So you're going to need to think about, when you're writing this program, what variables do I need in terms of uh, keeping track of input, user input, and possibly other variables that you're going to need to do calculations. So first of all, you're going to need you're going to need a name from somebody. So somebody's name. So we'll say get name and store in a string variable. Okay. Then you're going to know, I think I asked you to get the pay rate. So generally speaking, if I were you, if you're going to use a data type, if you're going to have any of the things that you're working with has decimals in it, in your case, a pay rate and hours both can have decimals in them, I would just use a double if I were you. So you get pay rate in a double data type. All right, so the pay rate's how much they make per hour. Generally speaking, when you work, you make an hourly wage unless you're a white-collar worker. And we talked about this in the after class on Friday, but not after class, but like after school on Friday. I don't remember if you were there. I guess not. But so get pay rate, and then you also have to get the hours worked. So the same thing, just do a double copy this. I'll copy that at least. I'm going to get pay rate and change that to hours worked. Okay, so these are your variables that you're going to start out with, and you're going to need some more, and we'll figure out what those things are here. Then what you're going to do is you're going to prompt, so we're going to leave a little space here because you're going to need more variables later on. And so here you're going to prompt the users to get data, and then you're going to use your myscan.next double to get the data that you want. Once you've gotten the data, you have to make a decision. How are you going to find out any overtime that gets double overtime, and what overtime gets 1.5 times pay? Or so let me rephrase that. You're going to have to decide what pay gets 2 times for the overtime and what pay gets 1.5 times multiplier. Because I believe, and I say, if you work over 60 hours, you'll get two times your pay, and if you work over 40 hours, you'll get 1.5 times your pay for every hour between 40 and 60, and then you're going to have a regular pay. So if we take a look at that right there, we can see a number of variables within that we're going to use just by what I was saying. So first of all, we have that 2 times pay. So let's create a variable that just says 2 times pay. We'll create a variable called 2 times pay, and we're going to have that equal 2. And then you're going to need a variable called 1, and I can't do with that. It has to be 1 and a half pay. That's going to equal 1.5. And because we're going to stick with these with the double data type for all of them, so those just make those double data types. Okay, so you got those variables. Then what you got to do is we also decided that we had to have, you're going to have hours worked over 60 and hours worked between 40 and 60. So you may want to have a variable for those as well. So those you could actually just do. Well, no, for this case, let's keep everything double. So you want to have a variable hours worked over 60. Set that to 0, and then think about creating a variable, and then create another variable for variable hours worked over 40 less 60, and set that to 0. All right. So we got those variables, we've seen that. So now we got to decide how we're going to work with this. We've identified some variables here. Let's talk about the conditions. So what we're doing is we're taking all this stuff and we're going to look to see if they have worked overtime. And the first overtime that you're probably going to want, you can do this a couple of ways. You can start at just saying if they've worked overtime and then check to see if that overtime is over 60 hours. You could, I mean, there's really quite a few ways that you could write this. And what I was talking about in class is that you probably want to check to first check to see if they've worked over 60 hours. And so you would write an if statement. So right here, write an if statement to see if they worked over 60 hours. Okay, and if they did that, you would take all the data. So you would, all the data that you got except the name, you get the pay rate times the hours worked. You can use those, but first you got to figure out how many hours over 60 that they worked. And that should be, that's easy math. You're MSTC, so you should figure that out. You've worked 65 hours. How do you figure out how many hours over 60 you work doing that? You just take the hours worked minus 60 and it'll give you an amount. And then you multiply that amount by the pay rate times the multiplier that we have here, 2 times pay, and that'll give you how much money they made for that overtime over 60 hours. Now, you're probably wondering, like, what does this whole thing deal with overtime and pay rates and things like that? I didn't think about, usually when I teach this in college, everybody's had a job. You probably have never had a job before, so you don't quite get this. Just know that, like, when your first jobs, if you're an hourly employee, a lot of times you have the opportunity to work overtime and things like that. And when you work overtime, you make more money. You make 2 times 1.5 pay, things like that. I don't want to take too much time because it'll take up too much space on the video and it may not upload. So start with this. So start down, create your if statement, see if they worked over 60 hours. Try to figure out what their paycheck was going to be. So you're going to first have to break down how many hours over 60 that they had, multiply that by the pay rate times 2, then you know how many hours they work between 40 and 60 because they're already over 60. So you could actually just set that, you would set this hours worked over 40 less than 60 is going to be 20. You don't even have to you don't have to figure that out. That's just going to be, you could set that variable to 20 within here. And then that $20, 20 hours, you would set 20 times pay rate times that to give you that. And then you'd have to add your regular pay, which would be 40 hours, times your pay rate. Because you know that if they're over 60, they have to have had worked 40 of regular pay. It's just how it is. All right, so then you would, so right there, and then we do have I think we do have a data type that we're going to have to, or a variable we're going to have for tax. So we got to write a variable for tax in there. Tax. That's going to equal 0.22. Then we're probably going to want to create a variable, a double for total, because you're going to have to add all those, the over 60 overtime, the over 40 overtime, and then the regular pay, and that's going to give you what's called gross, all your pay together. You multiply your gross by your tax, and that gives you your net pay. So we're going to have a variable, so a variable, we'll call it gross, net, and taxes. So we already got taxes there. So we're going to have these 2 variables as well. Once you figure that out, then you can put an else at the end of that block of statements, of those if statements. When you put an else in, put the curly bracket in, and I'll give you a hint. I'll just tell you right now that you're going to want to use what's called a nested if statement for that. Start with this, let me know, because this is already a long video. So start with this, let me know how you're doing with it, and I'll see what, send me your code or do something like that, then I'll take a look at it and I can advise you from there.